This lens can be summed up in just 6 words. The greatest lens that I have ever used. Anyways, that's it. Thanks for watching. What's up, y'all? It's Project Photography back with another video, and today, before we get started, make sure to follow all my socials down in the description bar below. But this right here is the Nikon Z135mm f1.8s Plena, and like the title of this video says, it is literally the greatest lens that I have ever used, period. And I so desperately want to talk about it in this full review. So there's gonna be a few parts of this video. We're gonna talk about initially build quality, image quality, and then who I think this lens would actually be really good for. So let's dive right in, talk about build quality, because to me, that's one of the best aspects of this lens. Initially, when you pick it up and use it, and honestly, even just look at it, you think, wow, that is a massive, big, heavy, expensive lens. But honestly, when I've used and handheld it, it has felt incredibly nice in the hands and has balanced extremely well with my Nikon Z6. It's actually a type of lens that I can use just one-handedly, and you wouldn't necessarily think about that when initially looking at this lens, because you think it's just so big, so heavy, but it is absolutely not the case. I really thought it would be a lot heavier than it actually is, and even though it comes in at about 995 grams, it definitely doesn't feel like it. But even though it isn't that heavy of a lens, it actually is quite a big lens. And for context, when I was rearranging my Shimoda bag, I had to alter it in a way to actually fit this lens. It is quite wide, and I think that's something that you have to work around a lot, especially if you have a certain bag that's organized in a certain way. If you're going to include this lens in there, you have to make sure to have extra room for it because it's just that wide. But it's actually not too long. I would compare it to something like the 24-70, just a slight bit longer. And now one thing that I actually found was super interesting is that this lens could actually fit into my 3-liter Pete Design sling. And now you wouldn't look at that sling and think, oh yeah, that can totally fit a huge monstrous lens like this and a Z6, both in full frame, not something you would consider to be a nice walk around setup. But when I was fitting it in my 3-liter sling, it actually fit quite nicely. And this is actually my main use for that 3-liter sling, is just to hold this lens by itself. And honestly, even though you're only holding one lens, it is absolutely worth it. It makes it such an easy walk around lens to have, despite it being not the smallest lens. Its lightweightness by itself is worth it all on its own. And obviously this lens is built to last. It is made almost purely entirely out of metal, and I love the way that the metal looks in terms of its finish. It's absolutely gorgeous, has a nice satin metal feel to it. And although this lens is not that dense at all, I have zero worries about its build quality or it breaking over time. It's going to last forever, and that's something that I have absolutely zero problems with. And to top it all off, even though it is a massive lens, it's built incredibly well, it is an absolutely gorgeous lens to look at. And to me, that's one of the best aspects of the Plena, because it's just so amazing, so beautiful to look at. It inspires you to actually want to take out and shoot with it. And this is one of those lenses that you're going to take around and people are just going to stare at you because of how massive that front element is. But to be quite honest with you, it just adds to the aesthetic of using the lens. Last thing I really want to touch on is the Plena moniker. And I know a lot of people kind of look at it and think, oh, was that really necessary? But to me, it adds to the overall vibe, the overall aesthetic of the Plena lens. I mean, it's just such a beautiful lens, and having that Plena moniker, and it's gorgeous cursive and then nice Nikon yellow adds to the vibe, the aesthetic, the feel. So to me, I like it a lot. And overall, the build quality is probably one of the best parts about this lens. There isn't a single thing that I would change. Love the build quality, love everything about it. But before we get into the image quality portion of this video, let's talk about our friends over at Mint Mobile and take a quick break. Mint is our partner for today's episode, and today I'll be giving you the 3 best qualities that I've enjoyed most about using their service. First off, switching was super easy, as it only took me 15 minutes to go from my previous phone carrier to Mint. Luckily, my phone allowed for eSIM cards, which allowed me to switch from the comfort of my own home immediately. And if you wanted to check them out, you can scan the QR code on screen or check the link in the description below. Second, they have great coverage as they're built on the nation's largest 5G network. It's allowed me to stream my favorite music while shooting, keep a stable connection while traveling to faraway places, and even allowed me to check my notes when creating content for you guys. And best of all, I was able to save a ton of money because their phone plans start at $15 a month. And from now through December 30th, you'll receive an additional 3 months free if you purchase a 3-month plan using my link. So why pay more for the same access to the same network? And if you're interested in Mint, you can go ahead and scan the QR code on screen or check the link in my description. Thank you again to Mint for for partnering with us in today's episode. Now let's get back and talk about the image quality of the Nikon Z 135mm f1.8s Plena. And one major aspect I want to talk about is the focal length, because one of the most commented comments that I've had on my previous Plena videos is that, oh yeah, 135 is such a tight focal length, so niche, so specific. And I'm going to be completely honest with you guys. It did not feel that way at all. Like, we're not talking about a 300mm or 400mm lens that you can only really use in like a handful of scenarios. 135 is a nice medium telephoto lens that to me is comparable to something like a 70-200, where it'll serve very similar purposes and cover a very similar range of niches and uses. Because I initially thought that going into, right? I was like, okay, does an 85mm 1.2 make more sense, or does a 135 make more sense? And I was really looking for something to replace a 70-200, because as you guys know, I don't own one, and this lens perfectly fits that bill. It isn't a focal length that is unreasonable for everyday use. I mean, this paired with a 3-liter sling makes it such an incredible walk around lens. And of course, this isn't a lens that you're going to capturing absolutely everything wide, super, get everything in the frame. That's not what this lens is meant to do. At the end of the day, it's for blowing out the background and the foreground. It's for capturing your images in a portrait-like style of way. Not necessarily of portraits of people, but in a style of way where you're isolating one specific subject matter, and this does an incredible job at that. Now, of course, with a focal length like this, we can capture subject matters that are quite a ways away. But, when you're talking about subjects that are quite big, you will have to be very, very far away. I mean, we're talking about capturing things like the mountains, like a city landscape, things like that. This is perfect for that. And that's why I've actually found the Plena to be perfect for actually landscape photography, which is so interesting because you're like, oh, telephoto prime, not something you think about when it comes to landscape photography. But you absolutely can. I mean, just take a look at these images. They're mind-blowing in every way, shape, or form, and we're just talking about the focal length. We haven't even gone into the aperture. So obviously, I really love this focal length, and it fits incredibly well into my own personal kit. And even if we just talk about it for portraiture, the compression of it is absolutely gorgeous. You can be so far away from your subject, have them be such a small portion of the frame, and just get that insane compression and blur everything out in the background. It's just such an amazing focal length, and one that, honestly, I'm so glad that I now have access to. But let's talk about the aperture, because f1.8, a lot of people were like, why couldn't they make a 1.4 lens? And honestly, if that's you, you probably should watch this video, because it's a really interesting, thought experiment into the Plena and it relating back to the Nikon Z system. I think you would enjoy it. But the f1.8 aperture is honestly more than enough. Never found myself needing more than a 1.8 aperture. I mean, you blow everything out in the frame, even if the background and the subject matter aren't that far away from each other, still get that unbelievable sense of separation. One thing I did find was a little bit difficult with this lens is focusing. So obviously with a Z6, this is a 5-year-old camera. Not going to be sugarcoating that at all. So it was a little bit difficult to actually get that pinpoint accurate autofocus. And if you missed by even a little bit, it would definitely show up in the images. Which is why a lens like this isn't necessarily the easiest to use. And I honestly would not recommend it to a lot of beginner photographers who are still figuring out their camera systems and so forth. Because getting tack sharp images is not easy. But when you do get them in focus, they are incredibly, unbelievably sharp. This is the sharpest lens that I've ever used. It is so sharp that it exceeds the 24 megapixel sensor of the Nikon Z6. I cannot zoom in more just because of the megapixels, not because of how sharp the lens actually is. And just going back to that aperture, this also makes it an incredible low light beast. I mean, you don't think about a 135 as a low light monster, but it being at 1.8 means that we can get those really clean images that wouldn't otherwise be possible with something like a 70-200. And I mean, overall, the best way I can describe the image quality on this lens is like if you took a full frame lens, right, and you put it on an APS-C size body, that is the exact same effect that I feel like when I'm using the Plena on my Nikon Z6 that's a full frame camera. It's almost like putting a medium format lens on a Nikon Z6 camera, right? And like, what does that mean? When it comes to the Plena, you have a larger image circle and you're able to just really use the center portion of it. That's why we're able to get zero vignetting at f1.8, which, mind you, is mind-blowing. That is completely non-existent at f1.8. Never seen that before in a lens. If I wanted to get rid of vignetting, I would have to stop down to some degree, even with the new S-line lenses. There is zero distortion at the edges. The corner sharpness, just everywhere across the entire frame, is the exact same from the center all the way to the edges of the frame. And obviously, MTF charts would show you something that's slightly different, But in real life, practical use, when I'm looking at the edges of the frame, completely tack sharp, zero distortion, nothing. And that is mind blowing to me. Never seen that before in a lens. 24 to 200 cannot do that. No lens, honestly, that I've used cannot do that. That's why this lens is so incredibly special. It is perfection corner to corner. And it doesn't, do that in a way where it lacks in contrast, micro contrast, or has bad colors. Everything about this lens is perfect. And it is better than my 24 to 70. That's honestly not even a question, because that was my previous greatest lens that I've ever used. This surpasses it. There is no words to describe using this lens. You just have to get one and use it for yourself. One thing I will say though is that this lens won't instantly make you a better photographer. It is a difficult lens to use. You have to be very good compositionally. You have to understand why you're picking up a lens like this, what scenarios you would use it in, because at the end of the day, it is a 135. We're not talking about a wide angle or a 24 to 70. This is a very specific lens to use, and you have to understand why you're using it and why you're getting it. Because if you don't, this lens is going to beat you, because it is not that easy to use. But if you're that type of person that understands why you're picking up a lens like this, and you pick it up, you're going to be absolutely happy. You're going to be mind blown, but just like how I've been throughout this entire experience. So now let's jump into the last part of this video and talk about who I think should pick up this lens. So I think if you're somebody that isn't a fan of the 70-200 type of lens or focal length, this is actually a really good replacement for that. If you pair this with something like a 24 to 70 f2.8 or even a wide angle lens, like this would make an incredible pairing, because now you can isolate certain subject matters and then capture any other composition you want with that 24 to 70. I think a pairing like that would be incredible for professional work, for everyday use. Honestly, those are the only two lenses that you would actually need. And then obviously the other criteria is that you have to be able to afford it. It's not a cheap lens. It's around $2,500. So I don't see any used ones coming anytime soon. So you would absolutely have to be able to afford it. It would also be great for things like obviously portraiture. I think landscape photography, this is a no-brainer, to be quite honest with you. It's amazing for that. It's a good walk-around lens, and any other niches that would fully utilize an f1.8 aperture as well as having the 135 focal length. Both are very particular, but if you can find that niche, then honestly, you'll be mind blown with the images you come out with it. I honestly just wish Nikon made more lenses like this that have incredibly perfect image quality every single time. Like, I don't know why they don't create more lenses like this. They definitely should. And honestly, if they had more lenses like this, I would be the first one in line to buy them. And I'm not saying all the other Nikon Z lenses are bad. They are great. I have loved everyone that I've used, but this one is just on a different level. Like, I can't continue to explain how amazing this lens is. It's just on a different level that no other lens has honestly come even close to touching. So I will continue to use this lens a lot. This is a lens that I'm making a long-term review over. I mean, that's probably not going to come out until like next year, but I'm continuing to use it as my main walk-around lens. I take it everywhere with me now, and it's gonna be used for landscape photography, portraiture. It's just gonna be that perfection of a lens. So anyways, guys, thank you so much for listening to me talk about the Nikon Z 135mm f1.8s Plena. What was your thoughts and opinions on this lens? Like, would you get something like this for your own Nikon Z kit? Anyways, guys, thank you so much for experiencing the world with me today. Please feel free to rate, comment, subscribe, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.